All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Nun Vav. We are searching for an understanding L'Shitas Rabbi Yehuda that we learned in the Mishnah Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis that Rabbi Yehuda says there was only one golden stand in the Beis Hamikdash, and the initial approach of explaining Rabbi Yehuda was to connect it to that which we learned in Shkolim. That when we know that there were 13 shofros in the Azara, and 2 of the 13 were designated for bird karbanos. One of them had written on it kinin, the other one had written on it goizlei oila. Says Rabbi Yehuda, neither of them were for someone who was mechuyev to bring bird karbanos. Both of them were for nedava bird karbanos. And the initial approach was because Rabbi Yehuda held that simply by writing on the shofaros what they are designated for, that's not enough to guarantee that a confusion will not happen. And if a person gave chayvus, which means one of them is a karban chatas, and the kohen who removed it will make a confusion and will think that they are both for nedava, because if it's not obligatory, both birds are for nedava, then he will do the avoida of the bird oila on the chatas, which will invalidate it. So therefore, we know all of them were for nedavas. That was the initial approach, and that would be the link. And therefore, in our Mishnah, how can you have 2 stands of gold? How would you know which one was for the pod and which one was for the soil? And the answer will be because you'll write on it pod and soil. But Rabbi Yehuda is afraid that just writing on it, its designation is not enough to prevent confusion. That was the initial approach, and the counter to that is that no, the Mishnah writes befedish and shkolim. Let's go with Rabbi Yehuda. Both of them were for nedava, but still one of them was for Toidim, the other one was for Bnei Yoina. Kavan had a Gavaldic picture, just so you don't know what exactly is the turtle dove and what is the Bnei Yoina, a pigeon, young pigeon. Well, these had different values. They cost a different amount of money. If Rabbi Yehuda holds that just writing its designation is not enough to prevent confusion, a pashat akasha. Maybe you're going to take the person who gave money for the Toidim and you're going to take his carbon from the Bnei Yoina, or vice versa. So you see that we rely on that which was written on the shofaros. So the reason for Rabbi Yehuda and Shekalim, which does not allow for neither of those shofaros to be for those who are mechuyev to bring bird karbanos, has nothing to do with Rabbi Yehuda holding that just writing the designation is not enough of a mechanism through which to prevent confusion, which obviously will mean, that's where we left it open, why taka does Rabbi Yehuda hold in our Mishnah that you can't have 2 stands? That we'll have to get back to. But where we are focusing right now is, why does Rabbi Yehuda hold in Shkolim that no shofar for kinei chayvus were allowed to be used? So we left off. The answer is that Rabbi Yehuda was afraid that maybe the owner, after depositing his or her money in that shofar, will pass away prior to them bringing this carbon, and being that some of the money is for a chatos, and we already learned the rule that if the animal is already here and the owner passes away, the animal has to be left to die. If money was designated for a chatos and then the owner passes away, the money has to be destroyed by throwing it into the Yam HaMelech, by throwing it into other bodies of water, or maybe grinding it up and throwing it into other bodies of water. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda felt that we need to have the owner here. You don't put it in a box and walk away. When you give it to the kohen knows that you are alive while he brings it. That's where we left off, and we're going to give continuation, and we're going to clarify that. Ultimately, we will understand that Rabbi Yehuda holds that we don't say Bereira. So this will be the famous daf in Shas that we have many times regarding Bereira. Bereira means retroactive clarification. And a great example will be as we learned the sugya. So when you put money in a box. And let's say if we know the owner passes away, we just don't know which bag belongs to which owner. We already said yesterday that every owner put their money in a standalone bag, not to confuse the money from one to the money for the other. Meaning, even though when the Kohen brings the karbanos, he doesn't know who is the owner of these karbanos, but we have to have this person's karbanos together. We don't want for anyone to take money from one person and some other money for the other person. Like one bird belongs to one bird belonging to the other. That will not be good. So every bag was separated. But if we know that the owner passed away, we know the owner passed away. If you subscribe to the concept of retroactive clarification, then all the Kohen will need to do is take the money that is of the value of achatos and throw that liyam melech. And on the rest, bring linadava. You can bring it linadava. Which money is lachatos, which money is lo'ina? If you subscribe to retroactive clarification, you can say the money that you threw away belonged to that person who passed away, and that was for his chatos. If you do not subscribe to Berena, if you don't hold that you can make as a retroactive clarification, then such a thing cannot be done. And really, that will be the biur in the machlekes and shkolim, whether you can have a shofar for chayva or not. Rabbi Yehuda leis lebreda, and we're going to try to find another source throughout Shas. Where else do we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to breda? We have this very often. We bring the din of buying wine right before Shabbos, or buying wine when you don't have other kalim into which to put the trumas omaisis. We're going to learn over there a din whether you can make a verbal statement that what I will separate later will be truma. What I will separate later will be meisid. Whether that is a proper way of separating b'di'evet, initially linking it, whether you subscribe to Breda or not, because if you subscribe to Breda, then what you will separate tomorrow, retroactively is already separated. So therefore, what you drank yesterday was already not tevel. Or whether you don't subscribe to tevel, you can't make such a verbal declaration. We'll speak it out again when we learn it inside. That din ultimately has nothing to do with Breda, but we have what's called the Braisa of Ayoy. Guys, we learned this many times, and we're going to review some Gavaldik Dinim of Eruvei Techumen. And over there is clearly where we see that Rabbi Yehuda leislei Breda. So we will clarify the reason of Rabbi Yehuda's not allowing for there to be a shofar for the birds of Chayva, because Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to Breda. This has nothing to do with our Mishnah. We're going to have to find a new reason why in our Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda does not allow for you to have two stands and Chevra a lot more. Let us continue. We left off on Daf Nun Hey on the base, 8 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The first approach was, that's where we were up to, is that Rabbi Yehuda was afraid that maybe the owner of that bag of money for a chayva will pass away prior to the Kohen bringing both birds. And if that happened, then the money that was designated for the chatos has to be destroyed and it may not be used. Now, this is touching on these big shas sugyas, right? Cheskas chaim. When you leave a person, if he was living, are we halachically, do we have to take into account maybe that person passed away? Or do we say that person was alive, the chazaka that this person is alive continues until proven otherwise? There's a cheskas chayim. And indeed, Rabbi Yehuda holds of that chazaka. Rabbi Yehuda does not have this concept of we have to have a fear, maybe the person passed away. Where do we see that? The Hatnan, we have a Mishnah in Gittin. Person sends a carbon chatos, an animal or money. There's no communication as we have today. When it comes to the Beis HaMikdash, it's a few days later, it's a few weeks later, it can be a few months later. Does the Beis HaMikdash have to say maybe the owner passed away? The Mishnah says no. Makriven oisei, because becheskas shu kayim. That's called, there's a cheskas chayim. Now, of course, if the person was terminally ill, it's different. If a person is terminally ill, don't put money in the box that's designated for kinei chayim. So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have a fear, Shema mesu ba'alel. So here the Gemara finalizes by tweaking it, Ela mishum chata shemesu ba'alel v'adai. What's going to happen if there's tako shofar for kinei chayva? And today you had 100 people putting money in it. And we know now that one of them passed away. We don't know which bag belongs to him. we don't know which now. Atkana didn't bother us because when they would bring the bag, they would buy birds, and the kohen that did the avodah had in mind to whoever it belongs. But now that you know that one owner passed away, you can't have in mind to whoever it belongs because we know that one owner left nicht. And Mela, the oila bird doesn't matter. If Reuven designates a carbon oil and Reuven passes away, you can still bring the carbon oil, but that's not the case with the chatas. And in our case, that you don't even have the animal, you have the money must be destroyed. Gewaltig. So therefore, don't put such a box. So asks the Gemara, the Niver Arba Zuzei. This is the Rashi says that the value of a bird is 4 zuz. So let the kohen that day take from the whole box, from one of the bags, take out 4 zuz, and he should destroy that money, the nishdei b'maya, whether it's just throwing into it, throwing into Yam HaMelech for sure is good. There's a machlekes rishonim whether if you throw it into any other body of water, if you have to prior to that grind up the coins or not. Okay, whatever. Destroy the money. V'hanach, and all of the rest will be nishtaru. Because why will we not be able to say that the money that was thrown away, that was destroyed, is designated, belongs to the owner who passed away? And then, by the way, the Chachamim hold you do just that. That's why the Chachamim hold you can have a box for the kinim of Chayva. Elama, that's the word that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't subscribe to this concept, to this mechanism known as Breira, as retroactive clarification. If you subscribe to Breira, you do exactly that. But if you don't subscribe to Breira, you can't do that. And now we're looking, where else would we find it's better? We can just say that's the reason. It's much better if we can find another place where Rabbi Yehuda again says a din based on him not subscribing to the din of Breira. Just to know, Chavra, Breira is a shas sugya, and we paskin that by dinei Torah leis lon Breira, and by the Rabbanans we do follow Breira. Okay, so we know long gewaldig. So lema mohadetnan. Now this is really a braisa. Gewaldig halakeyach yain bein hakutim erev Shabbos. That's one version. Im chashecha. A person buys wine from the kutim are the nation of people who, under pressure from fear of being unnaturally eaten up by lions, they made a giur, they converted. It's called geirei aroyos, and throughout Shas we have this machlokes whether we consider their gerus a valid gerus or not. And this is so nigeya here, just to have a few nekudas. Nekuda number one: a goy who owns land in Eretz Yisrael, even though the ownership is not as much as a Yiddish ownership, it's ownership enough that which grows in his or in her land is not obligated to be tithed. Midoiraisa. Midrabanan, it is obligated to be tithed. Now, if this braisa follows those who held then that kutim had a din of a Yisrael, so then the wine that grew from land that belonged to kutim, they are obligated to be tithed midoiraisa. And even if this braisa and the Tanoim subscribe to the kutim not having a bona fide din of Yidin, doesn't matter. Just to be, you'll have to tithe it midrabanan, prior to which it's tevel. So there's a chiyuv to tithe. Now, 1 second. Kutim, how can you buy wine from kutim? That's one of the gezeres we learned in Avodah Zarah. So here Rashi writes, like he writes in all the other places, this braisa was written prior to that gezerah. Now you're not allowed to buy wine from the kutim. But then you were still allowed to buy yain stam. Yain nesach was also, yain stam was okay. Another thing, when you buy wine from an Amma Aretz, guys, remember, even after we make a takana against the Mai, but at least the Amma Aretz, for sure, would take off Truma Gedoyla. Not the Kutim. Not the Kutim, not because the Kutim were not that religious in certain areas. Guys, remember the beginning of Chulin? One thing was a big problem with the Kutim. Even in the dinim that they kept kosher, they did not interpret lifnei iver loisit and nichshol the way God meant it. They only understood that kipshuta in their erroneous understanding. They had no problem giving someone else something that's not kosher. So by them, worse than the Amma Aretz, if you buy wine from the kutim, even when you were still allowed to buy wine from them, you have to presume that nothing was removed. It's mamish tevel, not truma, not maisa shem. Okay, so take it off. So the Braisa is speaking about a scenario where technically you can. Now, there are two versions in this Braisa. Our version is you bought it from them mamish right before Shabbos. And remember, guys, that midrabanan, you're not allowed to tithe on Shabbos. Or, so here you bought it, and the only wine you have for Kiddush is this wine, and it's mamash et shkia. Or another version is that you don't have other utensils into which to place the truma and the mais. So that's the challenge. You have wine. The wine could be consumed if you tithe it. Obviously, it's something that has a chiyuv to be tithed, and you can't remove it. You don't have where to place it in, or it's too late. So Rav Meir says, no problem. Says Rav Meir, oimed v'oimed. So get up and say. Now, obviously, you can extrapolate. We're speaking about a barrel that has 100 loig. Truma, at least for the Beinoni, we established 2%, which will be 2 loig from 100. So oimed v'oimed shnei lugim sha'ani osid lahafresh harein truma. I can't separate it now. I don't have what to put it in, or it's too late to do it. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to miss Shabbos. I have 10 seconds. I can only speak. The 2 loig that I'll separate later is going to be truma. Now, really, my sedition is from what remains. So just what remains now is 98 loig. How much do you have to separate from my sedition? 9.8. The Brais on Daf Nun Vav is just rounding it off. It's not really 10. He declares 10, or the 9.8 that I will separate will be from my sedition. What remains now? What remains now is 89, right? 0.8, or rounded off 90. The Meiser Sheni is only 10% from what remains. So he says, Tisha Meiser Sheni. Now, this concept of you not needing to finalize the separation, only verbally making a declaration about what you will do, is only a b'di'evet. And therefore, whenever you can really finalize the separation, don't rely only on the verbal designation. And by Meiser Sheni, you can finalize it. How can you finalize it? Even if you can't remove the Meiser Sheni, since there's a din by Meiser Sheni, that you can exchange the Kedusha on money. If you have money, so say, umechel, and the money that I have in my drawer is going to be used, right, to get the Kedusha of the Meiser Sheni, and therefore the Meiser Sheni is completely chulin, and now the money has to be taken in Yerushalayim and only used for food, drink, etc., to be consumed in Yerushalayim. And now, says Rav Meir, v'shoy semiyat, divrei Rav Meir, Daf Nun Vav Amid Beis, right? And we have 3 Tanoim argue, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi, and Rav Shimon, they are oisrim. They don't allow for such a statement to be made, and the Havamina is farvas, because it's only going to work if you subscribe to Breda. That's the example of Breda. Because if you hold that there is retroactive clarification, even though now you didn't separate, you didn't even say it's separated now. That will be a problem, because then it's going to be a mixture. When you have truma in with other wine, oy gevalt, you have a demai. You're saying sha'ani asid lahafresh. So Rav Meir holds, all you need to do is make sure don't drink up the whole barrel. Leave enough to separate later. And when you separate it later, it went lemafreya. And therefore, since it went lemafreya, so when you drank it on Shabbos, you drank Nesukin wine. They don't subscribe to B'deira. When you'll separate it Sunday, Matzai Shabbos Sunday, Mikano Lahaba, you're good, but it doesn't go back retroactively. So when you consume that on Shabbos, you consume Tevel, whether it is Midairaisa, because a Kuti has a din of a Yid, whether a Kuti has a din of a Goy, and it's only Midrabanan. So what? Midrabanan, you consume Tevel. That's the initial understanding of that machlokes, and that will be a base that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold a Breda. Counters the Gemara. No. That's not the reason for this machlokes by the Yain of Kutin. Mimai, Dilma, Shani, Hassan. Why are you linking it to this general big machlokes of Breda or Ein Breda? No. Dir Kedektani Timer. Why don't you keep on reading what it says in the Braisa? And the Braisa continues there. Amru loy li Rabbi Meir hi atamoy the shema yibaka hanoid. I mean, even if you subscribe to Breda, all of this works if at one point in the future you will actually separate the Thomas from Isis. And what's going to happen? And we're speaking about not a barrel, a wineskin. That's the noid. What happens if the wineskin will crack and all the wine will spill out? If you won't end up doing it, even if you subscribe to Breda, it's going to come out that you, God forbid, you consume Tevel. If it's going to yibaka, if it's going to split, and that's like a big kasha. In other words, Fakir, Rabbi Yehuda might even subscribe to Breda, but he's afraid that something will happen that won't allow you to do the action that will activate the Breda. And the Amar Lam, Rabbi Yehuda responded, no. If, when it will split, I'll have a problem. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to have a chayish, that it's gonna crack. Oh, so since this is a narrow issue, do you have to have a fear whether the wine barrel will get broken or not? So that's not connected to Bereida, and again, we're looking for a source. Elsewhere, we're clearly, Rabbi Yehuda opines based on him not subscribing to Bereida, and we have such a case. Ella, miditani ayoy. Ayoy is the Tana. He was the one that's quoted in the Brayso. Okay, so let's quickly chazer the laws of Eruve Techumen. For sure, midrabanan, one may not walk outside of a city, however you measure the boundaries of the city and the huts that can be within 70, a fraction amas, which extends the city. There's a way of cheshboning the boundary of the city halachically. Beyond that, a yid can only walk 2,000 amas on Shabbos. If you want to walk even further, you are allowed to make an eruv techumen, either doing it beraglayim, going there physically, remember, or placing foods with all of the pratim, and saying that you're being Makabel Shabbos with your food. You only have 2,000 amos from the boundary. The question is, what's the parting point? What's ground zero? So if there is a village that is 3,000 amos away and I want to walk there, I'll put my eruv in between my village and that village. As long as I am within 2,000 amos from one side of the eruv, and where I want to go is within 2,000 amos from the other direction of the eruv, that's exactly perfect. That's what the eruv was used for. Now, one thing is clear: you cannot put two eruvim, one to the east, one to the west, because you can only walk 2,000 amos from your eruv, from your makom eruvim. The question is only, where do you begin counting it from? So there's two cases in this brisa. Case number one is, guys, that we're living in the middle village. There's a village to the east, there's a village to the west. There is a chacham that's coming to one of the two villages, and I don't know yet which one he's coming to. I very much want to go Shabbos and hear Fabreng with that person. I want to hear him speak, I want to hear him Fabreng, I want to daven with him. But I don't know if he's coming to the east or to the west. Case number one is, I put an eruv to the east, I put an eruv to the west. And I say that to whichever side the chacham will end up going, and I'll find out by tomorrow morning, that is where I'm kind of my shvisa. That is where my eruv will be. Such a statement is good, l'kula alma. But case number two, there are two chachamim coming, two fabrengers coming, one to the east and one to the west. I don't know yet which one I want to go to. And I'm putting, again, two eruvs, one to the east, one to the west. They're placed in the middle of the two villages. They work. And I say, tomorrow I will decide whether I want to go to the east or whether I want to go to the west. The chachamim say, oichet good. Now, this is only if you subscribe to Bereida, because you have to be kind of shvisa prior to Shabbos. Remember in Eruvin, by Ben Hashmashas, the beginning of Ben Hashmashas, at the end of Ben Hashmashas, you can't make that decision on Shabbos. You can't place two Eruvin. If you subscribe to Bereida, you could make such a decision even on Shabbos, because it goes back limafreya. And here we go, the Tani Ayoy, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, only on case number two. Ein odom masnal shnei devarim ki echad. Can't put down two eruvim and decide on Shabbos which one you're going to use. Ella, case number one, yeah. Case number two, not. Ella, ibachacham lemizrach, eruv lemizrach, lemayrev, eruv lemayrov. Case number one is where you only want to go to one village. There's only one chacham coming. You don't know where he's coming to. That's okay. That's okay. Now hold on. If Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to Bereida, why is it even okay in case number one? So Gemara explained, this is the famous Gemara. You asked in the yeshiva, what's the difference? Why is case number two not good according to Rabbi Yehuda? Because he doesn't hold a Bereida. And that's the reason. That's another place where we see Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to Bereida. Well, even if there's only one Chacham coming, you didn't know before Shabbos whether it's Lemizrach or Lemayrev. You didn't know that. So anyways, you have to subscribe to Bereida, because you become informed Shabbos morning, it's too late. If you don't go retroactive, you can only place an eruv prior, again, Ben Hashmashas, related. So the Mizrach or Lemayrev, case number one, Nami Ein Bereida. And on that, Rabbi Yechanan, no. The case number one is the Chacham obviously must be, he arrived at the village before Shabbos. He arrived before Shabbos. You don't know which village he arrived to. You're not leaning on Bereda. You said when you placed both Eruvim, the one that's going to allow me to walk to the Chacham, that one should go into effect. It went into effect. I was not informed. I become informed Shabbos morning. But the Metzias is the Chacham was already there prior to Shabbos. So the Eruv went into effect prior to Shabbos. In case number 2, the Chachamim came to both cities prior to Shabbos. There, what will designate, what will activate the Eruv is my decision. I must decide before Shabbos. The Chachamim hold I can decide on Shabbos, and it goes back retroactive. And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold the Bereda. Okay. So this already clarifies the Mishnah Shkalim. The reason why Rabbi Yehuda does not allow for any of the shoifaros to be designated for the Kinei Chayva, that's because if we will know that an owner of the Chayva passed away, since he does not subscribe to Bereda, then there's no way you can throw coins out retroactively linking it to the owner. So you're going to have in here coins that have to be destroyed. Now, guys, why isn't it batul? Why isn't it batul? Well, the answer is because coins, geld, money is something that's chashuv, and one of the rules of bitul is that something that's chashuv is not batul. So to prevent from that to happening, there can't be any shayfaris for chayva. So now that we disconnected the shkalim to our Mishnah, now we have to finalize our sugya. But haksiva islay clearly v'haraya you had a shayfar for Biden and you had another shayfar for Geisley Oilers. Why wouldn't you confuse one with the other? They have different values. So the question is Yom Kippur Nami Navitrei V'nichtav Alayu. Right, this is the part. This is the soir. Here comes the answer that Yom Kippur is different. There, for him to have to focus on yet another step is something that we are afraid. Why? Because he's weak. No, we pointed out yesterday, right, that there's a certain pressure of time. It's another thing. We're trying to remove responsibilities. The lavadate, only on Yom Kippur, he's not going to properly check the labels. And he might confuse one with the other, and everything will become invalidated. And that will prove that there's something unique about Yom Kippur. Forget about writing. Why do you need to have anything written? You know how much blood you have from the pot, more in quantity than the blood of the soil? The blood of the pot is a lot more. The hazutar, that's little. He'll simply see from the quantities which one is the pot, which one is the soil. We're just pointing out that on Yom Kippur, we are afraid he won't. Punkt on Yom Kippur, he won't notice that. Well, who says it's more? It's only more if you received all of the dam hanefesh. If you, from the outset, did not receive all of the dam hanefesh, which b'di'evet would be okay, then it might be the same amount. The Gemara says, well, first of all, that's only b'di'evet. As it says, this is the pasuk in Vayikra regarding the chatois. The es kol dam haparish peichel yisayim mizbeach or mizbach ha'olah, however the nusach and the pasuk is. So first of all, lachatchila you have to receive all of it. And v'chi tema dilma mishtapech minei. Well, maybe you taka received all of it and then it's spilled out, and that's not a problem at all. If you have some dam left, so the Gemara says even if it would be in the same quantity, anyways, normally the kohen would never confuse it farvas because high chivar. Blood of the goat relative to the bull is whiter or is paler, it's whitish, a lighter red, and bahai, and from the bull it's sumak. So forget about you needing the writing to shed, to put light, what's what. There are so many other simanim. This is more, this is less, this is white, this is red. Elama, Rabbi Yehuda, Elamishum Choshe the Kohen Gadol, and therefore because of Yom Kippur, Lavadaite. So hachinami mishum chol shel kohen gadol lavadaite. Okay, and now let's conclude. Now, one thing is clear that if there was only one stand, like we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, there is now a machlekes tanoim, not just about how many stands. Did he first put down before he picked up, or did he have to first pick up before he put down? That's the machlekes Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, and that affects the way we daven right now. So now we're going to go through about Tefilla, Shliach Tzibur, that was davening Yom Kippur, Musaf, in front of Rava, Ahu Denachas Kamei de Rava, and now this is what he was davening in the Machzor of Amar. That Yotzo, he went out of the Kodesh Kachim, and he placed down the kana. What is he talking about? This must have been talking about he left after doing the so'ir lifnai v'lifnim, and he put it down on the kan sheni, clearly. So he began using the nusach that follows the chachamim. And then he says, "Nokal damapor v'niach damasoir." Mamish. The next clause was dafke l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Only according to Rabbi Yehuda did you first take the damapor and then put down the damasoir. Forget, according to the chachamim, you would always put down the damasoir. There would be a moment when there was nothing in his hands, and then he would take the dam that he needs. So Rava corrected him. Amalei, that was chulsha of the shliach tzibur. They got confused. They didn't have a written siddur. He was doing it by heart. Can't say according to both. He corrected him. Clearly, Rava subscribed to the chachamim. He put down the damasoir and then the notal dam hapor. Okay, Chavre, we have another few minutes. Let's go weiter. Now that we finished the Ketores in the Holy of Holies, the Pod in the Holy of Holies, and the So'ir in the Holy of Holies, where are we up to now? Now we are beginning to speak about the Zrika, the sprinkling of the Dam in the Holy, which was either on the Paroiches, we'll see that in the next daf, or towards the Paroiches. So it says in the Mishnah, V'hiz v'meno ala Paroiches, but we're ala Paroiches, not to the north, not to the south, in the center, Keneged Aray Mibachutz. And had there been a Aron HaKodesh with the Badim by the curtains, as we learned, you would actually see where the Ben HaBadim would be from the outside Paroiches. So, now how do you know how many Hazois? The Mishnah says, Achas Lamayla v'Shav. You know what, guys? The Torah doesn't write a word of that. All it says is that you should do inside like you did. You should do in the oil mayit like you did inside. So Tanach Rabbanan, indeed. If you remember the psukim, we are Vayikra Tez Zayin, and this is now Pasik Tez Zayin. Oh, so we learned, yes, we were focusing on psukim Yudalit and Tezvav. Remember? Damapor, Damasor. The next Pasik, and then it says, V'chein Yaseh L'oil mayit. And by the way, the word Yaseh is extra. It could have says, V'chein L'oil mayit. So says the Braisa, says the Tana, Matamud Leimer, the word Yaseh is extra. The answer is, no, Yaseh means to do with all the details. And you know what all the details means? It means it's all the details. And the Braisa speaks it up. First of all, there you did not mix yet the pot and the soil. First, stand alone. You took the damapor first. Furthermore, same thing in the Heichel. And now let's just finish up the end of that pasuk. It says, right? We are doing a service to God who dwells amongst us even when we're not perfect, which is beautiful. The last line, even when the Yidden are tamei, nevertheless, Shechina never departs from us. And now by Omar Leah, to look at Rab Chanina, Maisa Daf, Nun Zayin, Hashto, he tells them now that you guys are in Golos. Bari Tameim, Zicher, you guys are Tamei, Tameim Atan, you are rejected. And he quoted the pasuk in Echad that Tum Asa, referring to Yerushalayim, meaning the Jewish people, we are one with Yerushalayim. Bishuleh, its Tumah is visible on her hems. Golos is when there's Tumah on us. So Amalei, so Rab Chanina right away responded, Tochazi Maksiv Buhu. Go and take a look what it says regarding the Yidden. Hashoichein itam betoich tumasa. Meaning, afilu b'zman shehem tameim, shchina shroy b'neim. And by the way, that's the whole word of tumasa bishuleha, that the tum is on our hems. You know what a hem is? A garment is chitzonius. And the hem is the chitzonius of a Yid. Sometimes, God forbid, can become tamei. The pnimius of a Yid never becomes tamei. Okay. And God willing, Chavre, God willing, to be continued. Okay, let's go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Nun Zayin. We are up to the Seder in the Avodah where the Kohen Gadol is going to be sprinkling from the bloods of the bull and of the goat, not when they are mixed together, prior to mixing them together. Towards the Paroiches or on the Paroiches, the first thing that we will have to deal with is that by Kachim, we have unique laws. One of them we just learned a few times, and that is Dafka by Kachim. That only if Shana Baha Kasuv, then it's La'ake. That when God writes to do a certain step, if it's not repeated, it only means it's a mitzvah, ideal, or a lechatchila. But when do we know that this step is essential? Meaning, if you skip it, even after the fact, you got to do over. That's only if God repeated it twice. There has to be a greater elaboration by Kachim versus the other mitzvahs in the Torah. There's another unique din in Kachim which have the same underlying rationale, and that is that we don't allow to make a double hekesh. If you remember, we learned that in Zvachim. There's no double hekesh. In other areas of Torah, if God reveals something in halacha A, and then I make a comparison B to A, so now I know it by B. At some point, I can compare C to B. C to B, B to A. Hekesh, hekesh. Chayzev hekesh. By Kachim, we don't make a double hekesh. And just to speak out now in the intro, perhaps Al Pi Chasidus, is that Torah is the Torah from all the worlds. It's the same Torah, but it's learned in every oilam different. And we learned a while back a Maimon from the Alter Rebbe that what is the Torah that's learned in Atzilus? Chumash. Even though sometimes we read that Chumash comes all the way down to Asiya, but let's go with that model. So what Torah do you think is the most important Torah that they live in Atzilus? Not damages, not Nezikin. The Iker Torah of Atzilus is Kachim and Taras, which is why in the Torah, Kachim and Taras is more elaborate than all the other dinim. So the Rebbe explains, the Mishnah Chagiga, that there are dinim that are called Gufi halachas, then you have halachas that are mountains hanging on a hair, then you have Oisius Parchas Ba'avir. Why are certain Oisius Parchas Ba'avir? Because in that world, this Torah is the least relevant for that world. Be Mekatzer. So since Kachim is the Iker Torah of Atzilus, Kachim have to be spoken out with greater detail. So if God wants to tell you something is essential, God will write it twice. And you don't make a double hekesh. It has to be spelled out clearer. And we're going to begin today's daf by asking, from we just learned that even the hazoos lefnai v'lefnim were not that clear. How do you know that there has to be by the pod achas lamayla? It only says achas lamayla by the soy. How do you know by the soy you have to have sheva lamato? It doesn't say sheva lamato by the soy. So we made a hekesh between the pod and the soy in the Holy of Holies. And we finished last daf by saying, how do you know all the steps of the hazoos on the paroiches? You're makish the oil moyed to the kodesh kachim. That's a classic double hekesh. You can't make a double hekesh. Wow. So we're going to have to resolve that. And then for the rest of the daf, well, we're going to have the machloikas, the big machloikas, whether they needed to sprinkle it on the curtain or in opposite the curtain, which will, by the way, also, that's important because by the Holy of Holies, we have made it clear, no one says it has to be on the ark cover. No one says that. Al is like lifnei. So is it opposite or is it al? We'll have a few stories in the Gemara. We're going to go back to the story that we had in Me'ilu, we just quoted. And then for the rest of the daf, as far as we can get, yes, at a certain point, the bloods needed to be mixed. Question we're going to deal with today, what happens if they get mixed by mistake when they should not have gotten mixed? Let's say the Kohen Gadol now is in the Kodesh, he didn't sprinkle any of the pot and the soil towards the paroiches, and these bloods got mixed. What do you do now? I mean, do you have to go back to the beginning? Or can you somehow use these mixed damim? And how would you do that? That will be a machlokes Rav and Abiyirmi and a lot more. So let's start, Chevra, 4 lines from the top of the Amit. Like we just mentioned, that how do you know all the details of the hazois on the paroiches? Because it says in Achrei Mois that b'chein yasel oil moed. So however you do it, lifnai v'lifnim, we make a hekesh to lifnim. So it says, the Gemara asks the Gemara, it doesn't make sense. Even the steps lifnai v'lifnim, the achas lamayla v'shev lamato, the achas lamayla v'shev lamato is learned. There was already hekesh, now not hekesh for everything, but hekesh for parts. Achas lamayla is written by the soil only. Shev lamato is only written by the pod. So you already made a hekesh in the Holy of Holies. Now you're making a double hekesh? Oh, so now we're going to make chazer what we learned in Zvachim. Now, first of all, it's not a full double hekesh. Because like we mentioned, the Shevel Amato is written by the pod explicitly. The Achas Lamaita Vehiza Oisoi is written by the sword explicitly. So this is called hay heimenu v'davar acharu. Some parts is only a single hekesh. Some parts. Other parts are a double hekesh. So we had the machloikis and zvachim, whether that's called a double hekesh or not. So first of all, if you're going to follow those who hold that since some of the dinim don't need a double hekesh, so you can learn all of the dinim, that's called that hay heimenu v'davar acher, and therefore it's not called a hekesh, means it's not called a double hekesh, is good. So no, that's at the end of the day, some pratim, right? How do you know that the part has to be achas lamayla, lifnai v'lifnim, from a hekesh? So how would you know that it has to be by the paroiches, by the para achas lamayla? That's called a double hekesh. To have a hekesh, Michael Meimer, so the Gemara gives two answers. Answer number one is when the hekesh is not focusing on the same thing. A double hekesh would mean that if there's a specific din by A, and then you make a hekesh to be for that din. By kachim, you can't now teach C for that din. That's not the case over here. The only hekesh for outside is focusing on the location. I'm sorry, the lefnai v'lefnim is focusing. The first one is about the numbers, right? The numbers of the hazois, which is not fully clear. The second one is focusing that you have to put it on the paroiches, as you did inside. One is about the makoim, one is about the numbers. You're not focusing on the same thing, so that's not a problem. And Iba Yisema, chutz mipnim b'chade zimna gamar, which means that even according to the shita that holds that heimen of a davar achet is considered a hekesh, here it's different. Why is it different? Like Rashi explains, the Torah wrote nothing of what you do b'chutz. Nothing. It's if the Torah would have written that you have to sprinkle it b'chutz with greater details, and all now you want to learn is how many numbers above and below, that would be a double hekesh. But since it's like mekoimos plus, since you don't know anything from the outside, so you are beginning to compare it to that there's a pot and there's a soil and they're sprinkled separately. None of this is a double hekesh. And even in the details, some of the details are also written explicitly. But since all of the dinim from the outside are learned from the inside, even the one that holds that normally when there is heimen of a davar achet is considered a hekesh, not over here, not over here. I'm reading inside the Rashi. Even if we're going to view that some details b'fnim even is learned with the hekesh, it's considered one direct limud. Because since nothing is written outside, so when there's one hekesh of a chen yasa l'oyel moyed, that for sure goes for the shevel amata by the pod. Because the Torah wrote no details, like Rashi says, the hechi dami hekesh ein alamed min hekesh kegoin im loy hutzrach hechal lilmoid milafnai velafnim ella al mashalim in the hekesh. If we wouldn't have to make any comparison other than those details that were already learned the hekesh, then you got yourself a double hekesh. And then, by the way, we would say shevel amata, yeah, but va'achas lamaylo no. But since God gave us no details about the Heichel, it's only v'chein yasa l'oyel moyed, so it's as if it's already l'fnai v'l'fnim. It's considered one limud. It's like we don't make exeda l'gzeda. Sometimes we say chad l'gzeda. This type of package can be made. Let's go weiter. Tana we learned in the Brayso k'shumazem. Einamaza, that's one sheet. Einamaza ala paroiches. You don't sprinkle it actually on the paroiches. Elo keneged paroiches, opposite the paroiches. However, Amar Rabbi Lazar ben Rabbi Yosi, Anida Yesiya Beroimi, I saw the paroiches in Rome, and here Rashi goes into more pratim. We spoke it out in the Mishnah. That's Me'ilah, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, and Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. That the Romans, from the many times they made exeda regarding that we can't keep Shabbos, we can't do a bris milah, and we can't keep Taras HaMishpacha. So first we sent an undercover agent to go into the parliament, and he made gavaldic arguments. Do you want your enemy to be stronger or weaker? You want your enemy to be weaker? Let them make a bris. You want your enemy to be wealthier or poorer? Poorer. Let them not work on Shabbos; they'll become poor. You want them to be numerous or less numerous? Less numerous, let them keep Taras on the Shpach. Half of the month, they can't be together. But then they discovered that person that made those arguments over there in the parliament was a Yid. So they said that this Gezerah can never be abolished. So now we needed a miracle. That was Kedai Dashbi, listen, my color. That Ashbi wanted to travel with someone. So he chose Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi with some details about that. And ultimately, like Rashi reminds us, that before they entered Rome, came a demon by the name of Ben Talmayoin. And first Rashbi was so disappointed, and he says that Oigevald, that I'm only going to get the salvation through a shade. The earlier generations would have had the God Almighty or a Malach, but he made use of what he had, and he put this demon into the daughter of the Caesar. And then he came to heal her. And then the Caesar, as a reward, told him, go into my treasury and take anything you want. So he went in there and he took out this Gezerah. But once they were in the treasury of Rome, and since he traveled with Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi, so he says, I saw the curtain, and I saw various drops of blood, both from the pot and the soil of Yom Kippurim. Now, if the dam was not meant to touch the paroiches, if it was only meant to go opposite the paroiches, Chayhanim's reason, you wouldn't have had the dam on the paroiches. And especially if he stood relatively far away from it. You have to know where he stood, which means that to hit the paroiches, you have to make an extra effort. So even if there's chul of the Kohen Gadol, some details, no, it's hard to make it further. Is that you have to put it on the paroiches? Says the Gemara, what proof is that? This is not the only avodas damim that was opposite the paroiches or on the paroiches. All of the chatois, hanasois befnim, like the parhelam davar, like the soil of avodas zara. Again, that if you have the Sanhedrin erroneously ruling regarding a detail of a lav sheyesh beikaris, or God forbid even on avodas zara, and Reiv Hatzibur, whether it is the majority of the Jews or only a majority of a Shevet, not including the Kohanim, they're not called Kol, that if they sin, that then the community has to bring a chatos, but the blood is sprinkled inside, maybe that dam is on the paroiches. How do you know that this was from the Avodah of Yom Kippur? The Duma of the Paralom Dover, Shel Tzibur, or of the Seiri Avodah Zara Havim. And by the way, you can even say further that he saw both types of bloods. We just learned in last daf that they have different colors. So maybe they're from different ones. There was a pot elam davar, there was another soid avodah zara. By the soid avodah zara, there's also a pot, if I'm not mistaken. So hey, you had both. Answers the Gemara, no, that the chazi davidi kisidron, the whole din, like we explained Rashi, that the kematzleif, that they cannot be one on top of the other, that they were organized. One was farther and one was closer. One was higher, one was lower in a Seder. That was not done when you sprinkled the Pad Helam Davar, and when you sprinkled the Soid of Avodah Zarah. That's only done on Yom Kippur. You know how much kavana you have to the blood organized in that way? It was only there if he was mechavan to do that. So that's a raya that this taka it needed to be not opposite the paroiches, but on the paroiches. Now I want to make a correction. When we learned Me'ilah, I'm almost certain that I mentioned. Remember, guys, that we learned in Gittin Dafmun Vavam days that when Titus the Russia, when he went into the Holy of Holies and he did terrible things in there and he desecrated the area, he also on the way out he took his sword and he stabbed the paroiches and it bled. So I think we mentioned when we learned Avodah Zarah that the other Chachamim could argue the blood was from that. No, it was not Kesidron. That blood wasn't Kesidron. And I'll go another detail. To have two colors down of the pot and the soil, that the would not come out of the paroiches. So his raya is taka raya. Let's go weiter. And the Tanan, by the way, this is a brayse. The Tanan nami gaba para helam davar shel tzibur ke I gavno. And by the way, just to make it clear that regarding the para helam davar, including the soil of avodah zarah, we have the same achlokes tanoim. Even though the Torah there writes clearly, it has to be sprinkled towards the ala paroiches. Does al mean on or opposite? Shumaze lo yoynogin ba paroiches. Elamavim nogul nogul. But Rabbi Omer, Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Yossi, Anidi, Yisia, Beremi, V'hoy Yoleh, Kama Tipi Damam Shopar Elam Davar, Vishal Tzibur, right? And they were one on top of the other, as we'll see in a moment. And if you're going to tell me now, don't forget here the Chachamim said V'im Nogul Nogul. So here you cannot. Here it's easier to argue. Listen, you don't have to do it. It happened to touch. And here Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Yossi will hold again Kohanim's reason. If you don't have to do it, it would not touch. Maybe the Dilma Par, the Soil Shema Kippurim Ninu, maybe the blood that he saw, maybe Par Helam Tzibur Shel, Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, maybe Siri Avaris Kichavim doesn't have to touch. Maybe the dam that he saw in the Pareiches was from Yom Kippur. So here again, the Chazinu Davidi, Shaloi Kisidron, was he saw on the curtain both types of bloods. In some places, he saw the blood organized, one lower than the other. He also saw on the Pareiches bloods, one on top of the other. So he says, I saw that it hit the Pareiches. End of story. And now we're going to start if all of these phenomenal scenarios of if the bloods got mixed up together when it should not have gotten mixed up together. Now, the reason why it got mixed up together is because there is a moment during the Avodah that you have to mix the Damapar and the Damasoid. And we learned in the Mishnah, our Tana said, and that is after you finish doing all of the Hazois on the Paroiches, prior to doing any of the sprinklings on the Mizbeach Hazav, you needed to mix them together. And let's go weiter. There's a whole Shadda Kohen Gadol. And you have this pressure. It shouldn't congeal. So what were to happen if B'shoigeg it got mixed up together? So let's start case number one. Now, when exactly did it get mixed up over here? So Rashi writes, it got mixed up before any step. That's what's mashma from Rashi, and that's very problematic. Why is that very problematic? Because if you remember, the shechita of the soil only happened after you sprinkled the pot. And we also learned, Sailor Rab Yehuda, Sailor Rab Nechemia, that all of the steps of the avodah that was done with the big day love and lefnai v'lefnim, the sequence is ma'akes. That's a problem. So other Rishonim, and maybe that's even Sharanashi, say that this is that you did the avodah lefnim, lefnai v'lefnim, because that's why you have the dam of the soil. But before you sprinkled anything on the Paroichesin, what happens if the bloods get sprinkled together? So we have two approaches. Amar Rava, I'll tell you what. Only do the avodah once. And the oil and you can fulfill both obligations with a single act of sprinkling. In other words, first of all, the Damim they don't lose their identity. Each one retains its identity. And that's L'kula Alma. So oy bazoy, you have both the pot and the soil. So do one act of sprinkling and have in mind for both. So holds it up. So Amrua Kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah, they said, Amrua Kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah, that what Rabbi held, and Rabbi Yirmiyah said his sharp words, which we find elsewhere as well, plenty of places. Amar Bavloi Tipshoi, these foolish Babylonians. It's not their fault. It's because of the environment. They live in a dark environment. The Gashmias, for short, means the Ruchnias. Therefore, sometimes Nishklor, the Omri Shmaitza the Machashchan, they say dark statements. And why is it dark? Why did he completely reject it? Because Koyov Lamailo destroyed Mekam out of the pot. If you're doing it all together, so the Achas Lamaila is also from the Sa'ir, then you're doing the Lamata. You went out of sequence. And Bahatleida Amna specifically, Tez Zayin Pasuk Chav, look inside the Chumash. It says, V'chila mechaper es HaKodesh, and he shall complete the atonement. Of course he'll complete. No, that's not an extra verse. God is saying complete step number one before you do step number two. That Kale Dam Hapar, first complete the Dam Hapar. Completely, and only then, V'chaka Kale Dam HaSoy. Beautiful. So what should you do according to Rabbi Yirmiyah? Ella Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Neisen Achas Lamayla V'Shem Lamata L'Shem Par. And again with the mixed bloods, and the Tosfos Yishanim, but it didn't fit here, it's only on that Chesam and Beis, says like this. There's a machlekes throughout whether mitzvahs tzrichas kavana or not. So if mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, then it works. Because if you only have kavana for the par, then it's not going to be the soil. Don't forget, guys, the damims don't lose their identity. The big question of Yirmiyah is how did he answer the question? When you throw the achas lamaila, don't you have the damasoid in it? So what if you did not intend? So if mitzvah strichas kavana, then it works because since you were not machavan for the soid, it's only for the damapot. And Tosfos writes, even if you're going to subscribe to those who say that mitzvahs don't need intent, so Tosfos has a gewaldige yisoid. When do we say that? Only when you're doing the mitzvah bismana. But if you are doing a mitzvah shaloi bismana, l'kula alma mitzvah strichas kavana. And since you were not machavan to the soil, you were only machavan to the par, then it only works for the par. Achas l'mayla v'shem l'mata to the par. V'chila machaper. Now you do it again, la kodesh. Now continues.
Wondering if you could say, Rabbi, that even if you say it doesn't need kavana, but if you dafka have kavana that it's not the sar, I'm only being mechavin that it's the par, right? So maybe that would help.
I like what Danny is saying. Okay, so Danny is saying, and we have such a thing, right? It's good to know that there are times that even if mitzvahs don't need kavana, but a negative kavana undoes it. Tosfos doesn't write them. Tosfos writes this word, which is another chiddush. What you're saying can be worded as a question. What's his raya? Maybe he has a kavanah not for the soil. And that's shitas Tosfos. You show them that mitzvahs, tzrichas, even if you say mitzvahs, lav tzrichas kavanah, shaloi bizman, and it needs kavanah. Then the Tosfos speak about bal tosef. We don't have time. This is a great topic. Okay, now let's go to the next step. And here Rabbi Yirmiyah will get tripped up. What's the next step? What happens if nisarbu leidamim b'damim b'matanos v'achroinois? Let me say what that means. The Kohen Gadol sprinkled achas l'mayla of the pot. For whatever reason, now he mixed the bloods together. Now think about it. What is he going to do now? He's going to do sheva l'mato. We got a problem here. What's the problem? Because in it, you have the soil, right? Then you're going to do the sheva l'mato of the soil before you do the achas l'mayla. Guys, we're going to go back to Rava. We already said Rabbi Yirmiyah. You're thinking about Rabbi Yirmiyah, you don't see the problem. What did Rava say? Rava said before, you can do a one sprinkling for everything. So if it happened afterwards, now Rav Papa doesn't know Shitas Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rav Papa wanted to be mamshech, he wanted to extend Rava's opinion. So Rav Papa, and he said it in front of Rava. L'meimara, you'll tell me the same thing. Nois and sheva l'mato. Keep on going. Rava minimized the steps. Rava included everything together. You sprinkled one of the damapad, sprinkle 7 times lamata, and that will be l'shem apad and l'shem asoid. What are you missing? The achas lamayl of the soid. The chayz of the nice and achas l'shem asoid. Would you say that? So Rava got upset. Rava said they called me foolish for what I said before. Now they're going to call me the fool of the fools. They called us tipshoim, not naranim, fools. Which is, what are they going to say? They're going to get upset. They're going to say that we in Eretz Yisrael were teaching those Babylonians and that they don't chop, they don't learn. The like a meeting. What will be the problem? Because even Rava would not agree to that. That's even worse. And that's for sure not the correct procedure. So here, even Rava, Rava, now he will hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah. Here he'll hold like Rabbi Yirmiyah. You don't have an option over here. Noisen, Shevelamato, and you have in mind only L'Shem Par. And therefore it doesn't work for the soil. And now, the Choyzev and Noisen, Achas Lamayla, the Shevelamato, L'Shem So'ir. Like this, you follow the correct sequence. Another beautiful case of mixtures. What happens, says the Gemara, if Nasar V'loi,
why can't he just, according to Rava, just do one more above, and then 7 below, and then he accomplished both of them?
Why? Let's figure it out. So then he's asking, why do you do one more above? Because you have to finish the Dam Hapar. See, before he did it over Basachas. Before he did it about here, if he's going to do one above, then he did one stand-alone step of the Sa'ir before he did the Sheva Lamata by the pod. That's also out of sequence. Even according to Rava, that's out of sequence. Rava only, there's one after the other, and then there's one together with the other. Like, how do you view Basachas? Like, Gita v'yoda b'orin kiyachas. Gita v'yoda b'orin kiyachas means that Rava Mistamas describes that even though it happened together, you can view it as Basachas. I have to get the right oasis. It works. No, it's in the first case, you don't say that the soil was before the Sheva Lamata of the pod. Because since the soil was with the pod, we can view it as with the pod. It was with the pod. But if you're going to do a standalone soil, that got in the way between the Achas Lamayla and the Sheva Lamata of the pod. Okay, next. Now you're going to have the cups got mixed together. Let's go back to the whole fear of Rabbi Yehuda. The cups got mixed together. Now, the bloods are not mixed up together, but we don't know which one is which. Now, again, one is pale and one is not. You know what? The Kohen Gadol is ashtikal colorblind, and the damin got spilled out, and the cups, everything looks the same to him. Now that we learned the importance of never going out of sequence, so you have to make 3 applications. Why do you make 3 applications? A, B, C. Cup A, cup B. You go A, B, A. Abba, why are you're doing it like this? Noisin, v'chayzev v'noisin, v'chayzev v'noisin, shloisha pa'amim, and you covered all your bases. Because if the first cup that you took was taka damapar, which means cup base is damasoir, so when you did base, you're good. Aleph was, again, just to make sure for the other possibility. What was the other possibility? That Aleph is damasoir. So if you did soy before pod, it's completely invalidated. It's garnished. So now you do base is the pod, but you have to do the soy after the pod. So if you apply it 3 times separately, then for sure, whichever one is which, you covered your bases. Now we have another mixture. Now this is really a very unusual case. And that is, cup A is the dam hapod. Cup base is the dam hasoy. And they never got mixed up together. For some reason, there was a cup gimel. And some of the blood of Aleph and some of the blood of Beis went into Kab Gimel. And in Kab Gimel, they're mixed together. Now, let's just clarify the question. No one is even thinking about whether you should use Kois Gimel. Of course not. You have Aleph and Beis separated. The question will only be, how do we classify Kois Gimel? How do we classify Kois Gimel? Guys, what do we do with the remnant of the blood? There's something called Shirayim. And all of the karbanis that are brought inside, the remaining blood is poured al yisoid mizbach ha'olam. But if there are damim that are not called shirayim, but they are called dechuyin, rejected bloods, or they are pulled straight in the canal. So what we want to know right now is if such a thing were to happen, how do we classify the blood in Kais Gimel? Let's read it inside. Mixas damim nis'ar v'loi, in a third cup. In Kais Gimel, what we'll call, or mixas damim loinis arvoloi, but the pot is in Kais Aleph and the side is in Kais Beis. So Pshita, one thing is clear that Kika Yoev, when you continue the avoid of placing the damim, of course, mivadoin Yoev. You apply it from the Aleph and Beis that are separated. The question is, Miu Hanoch, the mixed bloods in the utensil, do we say Shirayim Habu? We classify it as Shirayim. And therefore, at the end of all of these steps, Uli Yisoid, Asli, you pour it on top of the base of the outer altar, Oy Yoma, that you consider it Dechuyim rejected damim, and therefore, Va'aslu La'ama. Now let's link this boya to the prior boys. What happens if you only have mixed bloods? So either Rava or Rabbi Yirmiyah, you can use it. It's not really rejected. But you know when they say you use it when you have nothing else other than the mixed bloods. Silent Rava, silent Rabbi Yirmiyah, if you have an option, because some of the bloods remain separated, don't use the mixed bloods, even if you're going to do it like Rabbi Yirmiyah says. That's the beautiful question. So you can argue it's not called a choyim, because this blood itself could have been used. On the other hand, in our case, where you have still standalone, unseparated, unmixed up bloods, no one is going to use Kois Gimel. So de facto, it became rejected. If we classify it as rejected, then you cannot put it on the Amam. That is the Bayam. So Amar of Papa, like this, he links it to the following case. Guys, guys, think about it. What happens if you shecht an animal, like a chatas, that's where they have this discussion, and the kohen who's doing the Kabbalah, for whatever reason, didn't use one nizrak, he used 2 cups. Some of the dam in cup Aleph and some in cup Beis. And then when he applied the blood on the Mizbeach, there are a few cases. In this case, he only used Kois Aleph. Very similar. How do you classify cup B? Is it Shirayim Feid Mizbeach or is it the Chuyin? Let's read it. So Amar Papa Fil Ulaman the Amar than the case that we just described. Kois Echad Oise Chaveroi Shirayim. In the case of Chatos, that's the case that we speak about. It can be to other korbanos as well. And Kab B is also poured al Yisod Misbach Ha'olah. You know why? Hanamili. Because when you had the 2 cups, they were both equally good. None of them was better than the other. None of them were rejected on any level. Ibay Lamesa of Matziyov, right? The Ibay Lamesa of Matziyov. But in our case, since in our case you have Kois Aleph, Kois Beis Soy, Kois Gimel mixed. In this case, Bein L'Rava, Bein L'Rab Yirmiyah, don't use Kois Gimel because you have the better option of Kois Aleph. So since now you rejected Kais Gimel, Avol, hi, the E Boila Mesa, if you're going to ask a Shiloh to a Rav, which they asked, can I use Kais Gimel, especially L'Rava, and just get over with it? Do Achas Lamayla v'Shevel Lamata for both? It's not forbid that attitude. I'm saying he would have told him no. So now we should consider it and reject it. Now we're going to go to the opposite direction. So I go punk. You're telling me it's the choyin. I'm going to tell you it's shirayim. And even that when you have kois echad ois echaveiroi, in the case of the chatois, you have two cups. You only use kois aleph. Even those who say kois base of the chatas is called the choyin and it's not poured al yisoid, it has to go into the amon hanamili vir. Fakert, since you had two cups, this is gavaldik, and you could have chosen each one, and you chose cup aleph. Your choice rejected kois base. Kois base was just as good. That is rejection. Rejection means fakert, two things are equally good for you, and for whatever reason you chose aleph, that means you rejected the other. That's called you were the dachia biyadayim. But if the reason when you have place aleph base gimel, it wasn't that you chose aleph and base. No, you were told for a technical reason, don't use gimel. It wasn't you who rejected it. And we're not even saying that halacha rejects it because it has an intrinsic issue. It doesn't. Since it's mixed together, it's better to follow the sequence separated. That's not called dachui. I would argue it's still called shirayim. And that's the end of this. So now we have a machlokes. How do we view kois gimel? Machlokes amayroim. But now that we mentioned the case of achatos, now we're going to chazer the case of achatos, where you were makabel the dam in two cups. So the Tanya, again, the Tanya is regarding Kabbalah into using two cups. Now the beauty in Vayikra is that the Torah introducing the Korban Chatos doesn't give one case. Remember in the Chumash, again, this is the Torah of Atzilus. Everything is spoken out with detail. The most elaborate in the Torah is Kashrus, Mamish, which is connected to Taras, Tazriya Mitzvah, and Kachin. That's the Iker Torah of Atzilus. The first dinim that the Torah was speaking about was the Chatos of the Nasi. I mean, there were many. There was the Kohen of Moshuach. Then you have Asher Yossi Nechta Ayechata, and there the Torah says ve'ezdama yishvoich. But then when the Torah at the end speaks about the ordinary chatos, the Torah says ve'es kol dama yishvoich. Now we got a problem here because the word kol, all, is a inclusionary word. All of the dam, even that which you might have thought not, everything should be poured on the yesod. And fakert, when the Torah says by the parsha of Nasi that brings the chatos, the fact that it does not say kol, it says as domai, its blood is a exclusionary expression. So now we have to figure out when do we include and when do we exclude. So says the Tana, look at this case, not two cups. You were makabel in 4 cups. The nosa achas that you gave from each cup, you applied it on one of the karanas. Chatas is unique because you don't shtayim shem arba it. Every corner, every horn gets its own blood application. This Kohen used every cup for a different horn. So mamash, every cup has that which was put and that which remained. So how do you know that they are all poured on the yisoid? They are all called shenayim. Oh, that is from the eskol dama yishbach. That includes that case. What happens if you applied the 4 corners only for 1 cup? The other cups were b'chlal not used. That you might have thought that it's still called shirayim. No, Talmud Leimer, the esdama, its blood, right? It's exclusionary. The cup from which you took the dam is going on the yesod. That's called shirayim. The chuyin. One Tana. However, Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Shimon Aimer, no. That that even in this case, all of them go on the Yisrael. Everything is called Shenayim. Talmud Leimer, Ves Kol Dama Yishpaich. Kol again is this inclusionary. Even in this case, all of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon, it says Ves Dama Yishpaich. It's is a exclusionary expression. So Amar Ravashi, there's one scenario that even he will say it's not called shirayim, and that is lema'ute shirayim shebetzaver behema. that which remained on the neck of the animal, that's not called shirayim, right? That's not called shirayim. That's already going to be called the choyim. But everything else, even if it's not being used in a avodah, even if it's in another cup, he holds that we are all considered shirayim. And that al-pi Chasidus, how beautiful is that? Like we are called the she'edus ha-pleito. That a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, even if he's in a separate cup. Not called the chayid is not dachui. God willing, to be continued. What we're going to continue tomorrow is now when we're going to make the proper mixing, and we're going to learn when we made the proper mixing to continue the avodah of Yom Kippur by the Kohen Gadol.